Good evening, and welcome to Visionary Conversations. I'm David Barnard, the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba, your moderator for the evening. Thank you very much for coming. I want to thank the University of Manitoba Alumni Association for its partnership with us in this and all of our Visionary Conversations series. And I want to acknowledge as we begin that we're in Treaty 1 territory, on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Metis Nation. The university and the forks of the city sit at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Oji-Cree nations. This is the fifth in our Visionary Conversation series for this year, and we're pleased to be holding this event on the Bannatyne campus tonight for the first time to use these facilities and to bring a slightly different audience into the conversation. As I was slowly moving through traffic to get here, I wondered whether there'd be very many of us, so I appreciate seeing you all here tonight. If you want to follow tonight's conversation on Twitter, use the hashtag #UMVisionary. This series, Visionary Conversations, brings together some of the leading minds at the University of Manitoba for a dialogue with the broader community. This year, we are including sometimes distinguished alumni among this group of people, so it's a broader group of speakers. The University of Manitoba is home of trailblazers and visionaries and innovators, pioneers, mavericks, defenders, explorers. The theme for the evening is celebrating Indigenous achievement. At the University of Manitoba, we're passionate about advancing Indigenous education and research, Indigenous achievement in general. Tonight we'll engage in a discussion with this very accomplished panel on the subject of Indigenous achievement. The format will be like this. Each of our colleagues will speak for a few minutes, 5 to 7 minutes on the theme. Some of them at least will be using some visual images that we'll see on the overhead screens, I think. And then I'll lead discussion. This is a little bit different than we're used to. There are quite bright lights. It's a little bit hard to see you, although I do see Bruce Martin up there at the back. So that's good. I can see all the way to the back of the room. Kathy says that if we turn the lights down, we'll look green, apparently. So if when we get to the discussion period, you may have to get your hand up high in the air and wave it so that I can see you. And then we'll have a question and answer conversation period after the folks have finished with their presentations. We said we'd be done by 8:30, so we will be done by 8:30. Just shortly before that, I'll invite Dr. James Blatz, Associate Vice President, Partnerships, to provide a short summation of some of the key points that have been made. So let's begin with our first speaker, who is Deborah Young. Deborah joined us just over a year ago as the Executive Lead for Indigenous Achievement in the Office of the President at the University of Manitoba. And prior to that, for 20 years, Deborah has dedicated both her professional and academic life working with and for Aboriginal peoples of Canada. After 6 years as a policy advisor at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, she joined the Public Service of Canada in 1997, where she worked on a number of key federal policy and program initiatives, including serving as advisor to 2 federal cabinet ministers. She's a graduate of the University of Manitoba with a Bachelor of Social Work and a Master of Social Work in Policy Administration and Evaluation. She's a member of the Opisquayak Cree Nation and was born and raised in Winnipeg. She remains connected through her large extended family and connected to the Indigenous community in Manitoba and nationally through an extensive network. Please join me in welcoming Deborah Young.
Oh, look at that, my name. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our Visionary Conversations on Trailblazing Indigenous Success. Before I begin with my presentation, I would also like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I would also like to acknowledge Margaret, our elder, who's also here with us. Tonight's topic is an area that I'm extremely interested in and passionate about. As a Cree woman who has dedicated my life to First Nation issues, I am positively thrilled that our university is hosting a visionary conversation on Indigenous success. When I was asked to become one of the presenters, I started to think about how or what I should be sharing and discussing. Do I approach it purely from a corporate or university perspective and share all the great things our university is doing and planning to do? And trust me, there are many wonderful programs and initiatives underway to support First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. Or do I share from an individual and community perspective and the things I've learned from my community and from my own personal experiences? At the end, I went back to the basics and asked, what exactly is Indigenous success? And as a Cree woman, what does it mean to me? Indigenous success. For our people, it is both a personal and professional journey. But it is also a story of our challenges, obstacles, and lower expectations that our society has placed upon us as Indigenous peoples. And I believe when we talk about our success, you also need to acknowledge and discuss the issues of racism and discrimination, because the journey of success for many of us has been a turbulent one. The next 4 slides were the common names that were used to describe me when I was in grade 3 until I reached adulthood. As a child growing up in the city, I was bullied and harassed by my school peers because I was an Indian. And in some cases, my teachers simply had little or no academic expectations for me, and the options of a university was not an option at all that was presented to me. I was called a drunken Indian. I was also called a squaw. I was also called a whore. And then when I wasn't called those 3, I was also described as, well, you're not like the rest of them, or you are different. I debated whether or not I should use these hateful and ugly words. And I shared this presentation with a number of trusted individuals and elders to seek their advice. They encouraged me to keep the slides as is, because these descriptive words continue to be a sad reality for many of our kids and our youth. In fact, when I shared it with my mom and my auntie, they were nodding their heads in agreement, because those exact same hateful words was what they were called when they were teenagers. So the obstacles of racism and lower expectations placed upon us as First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples are real, and our success is that much more difficult to achieve. And yet, here I am, standing before all of you, employed at an amazing academic institution and working with people who I consider to be brilliant. Despite the obstacles that were placed before me, university and the power of knowledge became my tools to start influencing change. I spent almost 9 years at a university, first at the University of Winnipeg, and then the final 6 years here at the University of Manitoba, where I graduated with my Master's of Social Work in Policy and Administration. When I came back as executive lead for Indigenous Achievement, I knew this would be an opportunity for me to give back to the university community who supported and helped me as a student. Pathways to Indigenous Achievement is our university-wide plan to help support and celebrate the success of our Indigenous students, academics, staff, as well as our communities. It has 4 directions: supporting students, building partnerships and supporting communities, sharing Indigenous knowledge and research, celebrating First Nations, Métis, and Inuit successes. And it is our vision to make Manitoba a center of excellence for Indigenous education and research. The University of Manitoba is committed to Indigenous achievement and Indigenous success, and I remain hopeful that this pathway will help guide us forward. However, when I talk about our success, it is much broader than focusing solely on our profession and on our action plan. It is about our lives and making the lives of our children better so they don't encounter hate. I envision a society where our cultures, traditions, and aspirations are embraced and infused in all facets of our lives. It is also remembering our family and their sacrifices, support, and love they have given us. Indigenous success is also about honoring our elders and the teachings that they've given us. Indigenous success is not assimilation. It is about celebrating who we are and what we represent and how we live our lives. When I started my presentation with those hateful words of racism, and for years I actually believed all of those words and many words more, and I was full of shame and I hated myself. However, this is not where I am now. The principles that guide me are love, the ability to give and receive love unconditionally. Respect, respecting ourselves and respecting others. Courage, to keep on going and never losing hope. And finally, forgiveness. Learning to forgive is probably the most difficult, especially forgiving our tormentors and the bullies. But for me, it is a key if you want to move forward in a good and positive way. Indigenous success, Indigenous achievement, is beyond the walls of this university. It touches upon not only our lives as individuals, but also the lives around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Heather McRae, who is the Indigenous Research and Knowledge Exchange Coordinator at the University of Manitoba and Acting Director of Rec and Read, which is a community university sport organization whose mission is to develop and deliver relationship-based communal mentor programs involving children, youth, and adult allies from diverse cultural backgrounds. Dr. McRae is Métis Anishinaabe with extensive work experience in the field of community development and sport. And she just recently received her Ph.D. fall convocation in education from the University of Manitoba, where she was a member of the Ph.D. Studies for Aboriginal Scholars program. Yes, indeed. She's involved with a number of community engagement initiatives near the University of Manitoba's Bannatyne campus here and at the William Norrie Centre. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Heather McRae.
Good evening, and thank you to everyone who braved the bitter cold to join us. I am humbled and honored to be speaking about such an important subject and in the company of such an esteemed panel of speakers. That's all right. For me, the definition of a trailblazer is not only a matter of individuals' accomplishment, as great as they may be, but rather it is their ability to inspire others and to be a catalyst for social change. Some of the individuals that I will speak about this evening had the foresight to create spaces of belonging for the Indigenous students to follow in their footsteps. Others, through their courage and perseverance, demonstrated that doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it is necessary to create the type of world we wish to live in. All of these individuals believed in something bigger than themselves and were able to tap into the spirit of their students, colleagues, friends, and family members to chart a path that others would follow. My first story begins about 5 years ago when I did something I said I would never do. I returned to graduate school. So why did I change my mind? Well, the first reason was that I learned about the United Nations Sport for Development and Peace movement, and I realized that I could combine my two greatest passions, Aboriginal education and community sport. The second reason was that I received a phone call from Dr. Deo Poonwasi, co-founder of the Ph.D. Studies for Aboriginal Scholars program, or as the esteemed Aboriginal educator and co-founder, Dr. Verna Kirkness likes to call it, pizzazz. Like Bald Eagle Lodge and the Centre for Aboriginal Health Education, The PSAS program creates a space of belonging for Indigenous students at the university. It is a space where Indigenous culture and values, such as service, identity, spirituality, tradition, and respect, are nurtured by students, scholars, and allies committed to advancing Indigenous worldviews and creating institutional change. Through the program, I met an amazing group of Indigenous students who are making real changes in their community. And I wish I had the time to tell you more about them, because their stories are really worth telling. My second story is about roadblocks and allies. I believe the social imagination and vitality of a university, particularly ones with graduate programs, are directly linked to their research reputation. The University of Manitoba's Visionary Conversation series and marketing campaign taps into the human desire to do something important, to be part of something important. However, over the course of my studies, I heard professors ask graduate students to reconsider doing Indigenous and community-based research projects because it would take longer than other research methods. Or they would suggest to students to remove key parts of their research, such as working with children or visual methods, because of the difficulties and delays they would encounter from research ethics boards. It is true that community-based and Indigenous research methods take longer to conduct due to the time required to build relationships of trust. It is also true that transformative research methods are likely to encounter institutional resistance, particularly if the researcher wishes to share ownership and control of the data with their participants. I do not question the need for research ethic policies or boards, but my own battles to get my doctoral research project approved pointed to a number of troubling issues. When university staff have a difficult time getting approval for their research, it is understandable that they will pass these experiences on to their students, if only to save them heartache, delays, and frustration. But what happens when we invite students to be visionaries and then later tell them to conform? I needed a champion, someone to help me challenge the status quo to do what I believed was right. Fortunately, I had two, Dr. Joni Hallis and Dr. Deo Punwasi. But this is the selfish part. It's about me, the student. What about our research and our research participants? It is important for university leaders to recognize and resolve these issues, for if they do not, hundreds, possibly thousands of research participants may be silenced. People whose words, insights, and images might impact the ideas, policies, and practices of researchers, politicians, and community members. As Indigenous students and scholars, we realize that our research projects may not change the world, but they might change our communities. And that is something worth fighting for. My final story relates to my work with the Rec and Read Mentor Program, a holistic after-school recreation program grounded in Indigenous values. Like the Winnipeg Aboriginal Sport Achievement Centre, where I conducted my doctoral research, the Rec and Read program features a culturally relevant, strength-based approach to youth programming. Neither of these programs ignores the challenges that Indigenous youth face, nor do they reduce youth to the sum of the difficulties they experience. Instead, sport leaders acknowledge, respect, and nurture the cultural identity and resilience of youth. And within these humble, innovative, and underfunded programs, you find staff, volunteers, and youth who are trailblazers, or who are on their way to becoming one. In closing, the University of Manitoba's Connecting to Kids report reflects a rich history of community and Indigenous engagement activities at the university. Although it will not be easy to put the lessons of Indigenous trailblazers and allies into practice, it is the right thing to do. Fortunately, there are many scholars and community members who are eager to help the university move forward on its commitments. This journey will require the collective insight of visionaries in our community and at the university. It is an opportunity to build meaningful relationships and to work together. This This is the type of university that I want to work for. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. The third panelist tonight is Dr. Catherine Cook, who is Associate Dean, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Health in the Faculty of Medicine here at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Cook received her medical education here, graduated in 1987, was certified in family medicine in 1989, received her Master of Science through the Department of Community Health Sciences in 2003. We do have other degrees still.
No.
No? In addition to serving as Associate Dean, she has also had a joint appointment with the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority as Vice President of Population and Aboriginal Health. She's engaged here in teaching, student support, and research. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Cook.
I was wondering how I was going to cross in front of you. Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. As Heather said, it's bitterly cold, and we do appreciate that. I was very honored to be asked to come and speak to you this evening on this topic of Indigenous success. I'm going to take kind of a different approach to the discussion here this evening. Focus on one of the things that I like talking about the most, which is looking at the determinants of health and how they've impacted not only me, I'll be the sort of central part of the story, but at the end I want to challenge all of you to think about how you can make a difference at any point within this spectrum in achieving or supporting Indigenous success. And I think that Deborah has mentioned a bit about some of the what we call the distal determinants of health, which are really the root of all of the challenges that we have as Indigenous people. Certainly colonialism was and continues to be a factor. It's resulted in racism and social exclusion, and it's really limited opportunities for self-determination. Those determinants of health have ultimately impacted on what we call the intermediate determinants, which are all of those systems that support people. And when you're looking at how these systems have supported or invited or involved Indigenous people, healthcare systems, educational systems, community infrastructure, our environmental stewardship, and certainly cultural continuity, I think we all have images in our mind, examples, stories about how those distal determinants have had an impact on those systems. And finally, the proximal determinants of health are those things that we as individuals can primarily control, but they also are impacted by the intermediate determinants of health. So our health behaviors, you know, I still like burgers, I know what it does. Physical environments. Now, my physical environment has had a significant impact by my ability to work and to have employment because I've had an opportunity for a good education. So let's look back on how some of those opportunities arose. Heather's talked about what motivated her to go back to university. I have a similar story. Although it's one of those, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing kind of story. When I came back to university, when I came to university after having graduated from high school, I'd left a community, a system where I think I was really fortunate, grew up in a small community, went to a high school where everybody was either Métis or First Nations. It was a pretty good place to be. Met my husband, the only person I'd ever really met that I wasn't related to. And you know, we had an opportunity to really be ourselves, to shape our identity as adolescents. So when I went to university, I was really fortunate again, connected with the Access program. And again, there's this huge group of people who literally want to change the world, highly motivated, mostly young Indigenous people. Some of us went into medicine, and this is where the kind of negative piece comes in, really wanted to go and apply into medicine, but the program was called the Special Pre-Medical Studies Program. which sounded kind of special, but basically I'd always felt that it marginalized us somewhat and sort of put a little flag on us. So that implication that we needed special assistance was open to interpretation. I mean, the rest is basically history. I was fortunate to get into medicine. I've had a wonderful career, lots of really exceptional mentors over the years. I think I've had probably one of the most fortunate career paths that anybody could have. I look around this room and there are people that have been very patient with me and very supportive throughout my career. And I've always so appreciated that. And I think that that was one of the things that really motivated me to continue to champion opportunities to address some of these determinants of health. I think it's one of those things, kids call it pay it forward, you know, people call it giving back. I think that you can't really do that unless you have a passion to see change. And when you're looking forward to what your success as an Indigenous person means, you need to look forward to where your children are going. So fortunate that 2 of my children have had the opportunity to seek university degrees. Late in life, you know, you'd think they'd learn from their parents, but they didn't. So, but they're very passionate about what they do. And now I look at my grandsons who are having opportunities that certainly my husband and I never had, our kids didn't have. When my sons were playing hockey, they were the only Indigenous kids on the team. You can imagine the name calling that goes on the other side of that hockey visor. But now, with my grandsons, 4 or 6 out of 17 kids on a team are Aboriginal kids. And, you know, they're comfortable and they still get the name calling, but not nearly the way that they did. So I think we've made some small steps. And I think that I'd really like to just challenge people to think about those interventions that you've been part of, the difference that you've made as individuals, and where you can see it going. The Winnipeg Regional Health Authority has had some programs that have, or activities that have really begun to address some of these determinants of health. Workforce development, supports for Aboriginal people within the healthcare system. The universities have had not only programs, but really positive approaches to promoting Indigenous achievement. And the school divisions have done so much to make this a positive place for young Indigenous youth. And we have some wonderful examples in the inner city. And it's just so enlightening and encouraging to be part of that. So I've just really appreciated the opportunity to connect with so many people in this room and to be part of the work. There's just so many people in this room today that are very passionate about what they do. So I'd challenge you just to stretch it a little bit more and be there for our children. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I enjoy all my interactions with Kathy. She's always wise and caring and exceptionally direct. There's never any confusion about what she thinks about things I ask her to do. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Hart, who is Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Knowledges and Social Work in the Faculty of Social Work and also a University of Manitoba alumnus. He's a citizen of Fisher River Cree Nation and an assistant professor here at the university. He's worked in areas of child welfare, mental health, addictions, family therapy. He was the co-director of the Manitoba First Nations Centre for Aboriginal Health Research. Michael's research interests are focused on Indigenous knowledges, particularly around Indigenous ways of healing and well-being. His research projects have also addressed Indigenous health, Indigenous youth suicide, elders' participation in institutions of higher education, and the education of Indigenous peoples in social work. Please join me in welcoming Michael Hart.
Hello, Dancy. I am trying to get to associate professor, Dave. Gaskiti megan it is negasun. Wachakwi Nuigan. Atan se no agamagantik. Agani totimak, squawak, napiok, giteak, adnutagoyak. Agwa ni totimak. My friends, my family, thank you very much for this opportunity to share life with me. I deeply appreciate this opportunity. I have a bunch of notes here, but so we'll see how well I stick to them. I was thinking about, as people are speaking about what got me to where I'm at now. And I think when I applied to university, I didn't have the ability to get in university, meaning that my grades weren't high enough. And it's through an access program that I got into university. I was actually the SP program. I was one of those that did need that help. And but I didn't choose medicine at the very last minute. I had my application in my hand. And I said, no, this doesn't seem right. Because I was looking at psychiatry, and I saw what psychiatrists do. And is there any psychiatrists here? Better be careful. But I decided that, no, that's not right for me. Philosophically, it didn't fit. And my late brother, Gerald Thickfoot, was in the program, the social work program, and he said, just did this. And I said, yeah, okay. I'm still wondering why I did it, but it's been a good choice, and it's been supportive to me. That the people in the faculty were significantly supportive. That continued as I went on into the master's program. I didn't even think about a master's until the late Elizabeth Hill just talked as a matter of fact that I would go into a master's program. I think she did that with all Indigenous students, but I didn't even think of it. And so I thought, oh, yeah, okay. So again, I just went ahead and did it. But by that time, I had the opportunity to go and teach in Thompson for the faculty. And that's when I realized the fit for me to be an educator in an institution of higher learning. And so I made a conscious choice to do my Ph.D. And it's with the support of my colleagues that I've been able to do that. I say all that because it touches on some matters that I want to address, and I'm going to need help to watch my time. So, before I get into too much of it, I needed to look at the concept of trailblazing. And so I looked it up. It said, making or pointing a new way. And for my discussion, I want to emphasize new. I also looked up success. I skipped the Indigenous part. I figured I had an idea about that one. Success meaning a degree or measure of succeeding. We'll talk about tautologies. Another one is favorable or desired outcome. So when I'm looking at trailblazing success, it's making a new way for a desired outcome. Well, when I looked at that, I started thinking, well, who gets to point the way for us as Indigenous peoples? So I was left with that question. But then some other ones came up. Who gets to determine the desired outcomes? Who gets to define that we have attained the desired outcomes? Who is benefiting from the status quo? Who is willing to provide space? Space not meaning not just being here, which is helpful, but space in terms of minds, of ideas. How will this space be provided? Do we have to wait our turn until people retire, for example, in order to access that space? Do we fit people into the same processes because this is how it always has been done? Or because that's what the policy says? These are questions of space in my mind. So when I look at Indigenous success, I'm left with these questions. Who gets to define our success? Who gets to define what our outcomes are? Who gets to define what space that our peoples need, that our peoples want? Recognizing these questions, I come to another place then. I realize that we need Indigenous participation in all levels, in all segments, not just of our society, but within our institutions, such as the University of Manitoba. We need to provide space for Indigenous participation, such as the access programs that help some of us. But it's more than just that kind of space. As Kathy was saying, there's very capable and competent individuals out there who need that space, who deserve that space. If we look at the numbers of students that we have in the University of Manitoba in relation to our population, I think we have some work to do. When we look at the number of faculty, if I can name all the faculty who are Indigenous, then I think we have some work to do. When I look at the support staff, when I look at our administrators, I think there's still some space that's needed. Where are Indigenous voices? We need Indigenous voices to be able to express our desired outcomes. We do have our own ideas of what is desirable. And we need the opportunity to use that space to express what those outcomes should be. But there's another side of this equation, and it has to do with being heard. Gatriana Spivak, a scholar in post-colonialism, spoke about, can the subaltern be heard? Making it relevant to us, can an Indigenous person be heard? Because we've been speaking up for a long time. And I'm grateful that there are some people that hear. But there's many more that need to be listening, to be actively hearing. We need to also have counteractions to be taken to address such things as the racism. Not just the racism that's out there, but what we internalize, both as Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, most often unconsciously internalize. We need to counteract that. We also need to counteract the very blatant external barriers that are in place, including colonial policies that may be around within institutions such as universities. We also need places where Indigenous people can feel culturally safe, as well as have the room to interconnect with one another to develop Indigenous framed ideas, theories, practices, and protocols from within our own communities, but also within Canadian society generally, and within the university specifically. We need to remember that the university is a microcosm of the society as determined by those in power. This isn't just about you, Dave. So please don't take offense.
I'm listening.
Oh, okay. We need to look at all segments and levels of the university, of our society, so that everybody is participating in a new way. This isn't about one side of a relationship. This is about all sides of a relationship interacting in a new way, making space for new ideas. This means the students coming. This means the staff supporting them. This means the administrators developing the policies. This means the academics regurgitating creating new theories. But also committees, the board of governors, as well as our communities. So my ideas about Indigenous success is about that we have an opportunity where we're fully participating and contributing. Because if we don't have that space, if we don't speak, and if we're not heard, everybody's going to lose out. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, folks, we now come to the part of the evening where I'm looking for participation from each of you. There are a couple of colleagues who have microphones, so if you have a contribution to make, if you have a question that you would like to address to the panel, please indicate that. And I must say there are a couple of parts of the room that are virtually invisible to me, but I'm trusting that Chris will find people. Okay, let's start here.
Thank you very much for those comments. We as just ordinary citizens, if we want to mobilize and help to create a different society where Aboriginal peoples are valued for their history and their culture and make the society richer for all of us, that they can achieve what they want to achieve, what advice, I mean, Michael, you threw a little bit at us, but what advice can you give for how we can, as ordinary citizens, help to promote this change?
Thanks, Greg. Michael, do you want to start?
Sure. We only got to 8:30, right? Okay. There's a couple things that I encourage people to keep in mind. One is that we have a very skewed, at least a very skewed vision of our history. And until we're honest with ourselves as citizens of Canada, as people, until we're honest about that history, then it's difficult for us to create the kind of changes that it's needed. Not impossible, but difficult. That brings to the next point, that I think all people have to be able to look within themselves to see how they've been influenced. And I emphasize a lot of it's unconscious. So it's not a blame game, but it's about being responsible. Looking at ourselves in terms of how have I internalized these processes that keep me down as an Indigenous person, and how have other people of other nations internalized the processes so that they may continue to reap privileges at the cost of people such as Indigenous peoples. It also means then making, as I said, that space where there's a voice for Indigenous people and that willingness to hear alternative ideas. So that's a start.
Kathy?
Thanks, Greg. Nice to see you. I think just to add to that a bit, I would comment on, we released a report yesterday at the university here that talked about access to healthcare. So it was specific to healthcare. But one of the underlying themes as to why Aboriginal people don't access healthcare or other services in the way that they could or need to is because of the long-standing negative stereotypes that are entrenched in Canadian society specific to Indigenous people. And I kind of alluded to that on the slide that I had shown, but it brings back what Deborah had commented on early on about the expectations that people have and the need to have respectful relationships. So I think that it's difficult for people to meet Indigenous people on an equal footing. There's still that imbalance in perception based on those stereotypes. And I think that if we can get past that and recognize that respectful relationships bring out the best in everybody, that there isn't an expectation that you'll fail, but there's an expectation that you will achieve what you want to achieve. All of those things make a huge difference. As I mentioned, I grew up in a tiny little community. I didn't even know there was racism in the world till I came to Winnipeg to work after I finished high school. And I was convinced that if people just learned about what great people the Métis and First Nations were, they would change their minds. Not so much, especially in the 60s. And so it was interesting. But even in the 60s, there were people who were very positive and supportive and genuinely good people who understood that we're all human beings, we all have something to bring, and we can respect each other. So I think that's a starting place.
I would just add to that is communication. Communication is so key. Open dialogue, asking questions, not to be afraid to ask questions, because I find sometimes our non-Aboriginal friends are a bit cautious about approaching us. We're not scary. We're here to engage and dialogue and communicate and share. And we're surrounded by our traditional teachers and our elders as well. And we're here to engage. So ask the questions, get yourself involved, get into the community and talk. And it's key. To me, that's key to begin the dialogue and learning from each other.
Thank you. Other voices? No, I can't see.
I can hold it. Okay. It's not really empowering having somebody hold it for me. Bonjour, Konadishnakas, Makwado Dam Pegwasundunjaba. I came here tonight because I really wanted to learn more about, what exactly is going on. And it was just the idea of trailblazing Indigenous success. I just recently gone self-employed, and I feel that I'm very successful in my life. However, I came here early because I brought with me my friend who's a filmmaker, and we were hoping to film some of this. And she got told no. Now, I don't know what the conversation that went on, because this is what happens in Indigenous circles, and this has happened before. There's the dialogue the semantics has to be correct. I'll use an example, one between myself even. I'm from Peguis, and you go on our website right now, and they're doing a payout for students of Peguis Central School. So what about us off-reserve students? We don't get a payout unless you live on a reserve. That's what it says on the website. So I called the chief and I asked him. Well, I didn't actually call him. But anyway, he called me back. And he told me, oh, no. We always treat all our off-reserve people the same way, But it doesn't say that. You read the website, the words are not what it says. And so whoever came and told her she can't do this should have waited and said, oh, let me go find out for you. But no, instead, she said, no, you're not allowed to. It's going to be disruptive to the speakers. That's what she was told. It was the president that I was told that said that. And I can't go here. So not even being able to hold my filmmaker. I'm an emerging filmmaker, so that kind of ironic that I told I can't. And the fact that I can't hold the freaking microphone myself, that's really disempowering. And this is a very paternal thing to be able to talk about empowering Indigenous leaders when we have a room full of white academics. Where are the people? So is this policy that I can't hold the empower messages? That alone is just really sad. But a simple act like this is very patronizing, and it doesn't make me feel good. And it makes me realize, oh, this is exactly the reason I don't hang around non-native circles. This is exactly the reason why. I came from Ottawa. I spent 18 years in Ottawa, and I left Ottawa. Actually, I grew up in Peguis. I went to Ottawa, spent 18 years there, and I found out just how corrupt that city is. And my last job, unfortunately, I was the administrative assistant for Patrick Brazel, and I am so ashamed of that. But that was my last job in Ottawa, was working for the Congress Aboriginal People, because it is a puppet organization that gets millions and millions of dollars that does nothing for off-reserve people. I got to find that out firsthand in 2003. So I left. I came home so I can share my Indigenous knowledge with my people, with my grassroots people. I retrained. I'm an early childhood educator. I've got a diploma. I go around. I'm the cultural fairy of the North End. I literally have access to all these early education programs, and I am training the next generation to be strong and resilient, to know who they are and where they're from, and unfortunately, to not trust the non-native circles, because they're not there to support us. We have to rely on ourselves. That's what's happening. I hope that it changes.
Thanks for that contribution. Any panelists want to respond? No? Okay.
I think what in my eyes, you're addressing things of what I'm trying to speak about in terms of making space. That they're the little acts, but they're the big ones, but they're also the small ones. And our communities in the city of Winnipeg, as an example, I feel that our communities are quite separate between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community. There's many others, so I'm not denying that. And so what ends up happening is we have difficulties relating to one another, and there's distrust, and there's a barrier between us. Now, if we're going to create space, then we have to be involved with one another. That space doesn't mean that we remain separate, that we have to develop a relationship. At the present time, the relationships are unequal. And it has to do with the ability to implement decisions, choices, etc. That there are people, the people who are in influential positions are not from our community for the most part. I'm privileged. As an Indigenous male, I'm privileged. And so I try to use that privilege as best I can to create that space, space and that relationship between different peoples. It means then that there's also a redistribution of power that's necessary. That in these institutions, in these small dynamics, that instead of having the repeated experience where there's power that's placed or perhaps sprinkled down to a few people, that there's significant and real exchanges where Indigenous people could rise to more powerful positions and influence society overall for the benefit of everybody. So I think it's about relationships, which we have a ways to go yet.
Thank you.
Because I came back home 8 years ago, and honestly, I didn't fit into my own circles of Native people. So I went where I did fit in, which was with non-Native people. But I got pushed out 8 years later. I can't do that dialogue anymore. It hurts too much because they're not listening. I don't even listen to I can't read the comments on the newspaper online stuff. It's just too sickening. It hurts too much. That's why I'm with people that I trust.
And that relates to the earlier question about what could be done. Is that with the learning of that education and learning about those power dynamics, it's too tiring for myself, for Kona, for others, to have to take the responsibility to teach and educate everybody. So people from the different segments of society really need to take that up. I have some friends, some colleagues who are part of, they call it a white affinity group. It's not what it sounds. But their intent is to understand their own privilege. Their intent is to recognize what they could do to create change in Winnipeg as a society and to redistribute some of that power, some of those choices, some of that influence, and to influence our organizations. They are taking it up. The piece that I add to them is that, well, do that and don't forget to come back and talk with people every now and then so you're not isolated.
Thank you. Now, I can't see well with these lights, but are there anyone on this side of the room wanting to participate? Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm going to talk, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit muffled because I just had a tooth out and I have a gauze in my mouth. But I want to address the young lady who just spoke, who is sitting over there, and I want to say that trailblazing is never easy, and you seem to be doing a very good job of it, of interfacing between your community and what you see as this establishment who is still in an antiquated, perhaps, or a structural mode of thinking. And you have to transfer that knowledge to your community. I want to applaud you for that.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Oh, at the back.
Hello, I'm the media supervisor at the Bannatyne campus here. I also am Métis. And I also agree that the small sort of gestures are ones that we take home with us. And just to clarify things, there's a reason why. See, look at me, I want to grab it too. There is a reason why we don't allow participants to hold the microphone. It's very technical, and I don't think that I want to take up people's time to tell them that. So it's not just me, and it's not just, it's everybody. And it's so that we can hear your question loud and clear.
Thank you. Others? Comments, questions?
No?
I actually know a number of people by name in the room, so
Oh, dear.
I can find speakers if you don't volunteer. Sorry?
There's someone up there.
All right. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this. I just had a question if anybody is aware of the fact that there was a problem, I believe it was yesterday, with the medical services and the fact that people weren't able to get their prescriptions and stuff because the medical services system was down. This affected everybody in the First Nations community because it lasted for at least 2 days that I'm aware of. I'm just wondering if you have heard anything about this at all. How do you think it will affect the system, and how do you propose that we make changes toward that system? Thank you.
Do you have any?
No.
No, I don't think that any of us here are aware of it, or it's not really our domain of expertise. Are there any other? Can't see where you are.
I tried to grab the microphone too. Just a comment to the young woman who said about the media and how she can't look at the comments that are in the letters to the editor. I would say that you're not alone with that. I think there's many of us who feel that way. I remember at the time when David Barnard gave the apology for residential schools, and many of us were reading the comments to the letters to the editor in the paper, etc. And they bothered all of us. Well, I shouldn't say all of us, I can only speak for myself, but they certainly bothered me greatly too. So just as a white person, that's my comment.
Thanks, Joanne. David?
Actually, I hadn't intended to speak, but it's very quiet tonight, and I thought I'd use the opportunity to learn a little bit more about your experiences. I'm being attacked by this thing. I guess I'm one of those people that sits in an audience and is considered white. It's not a term I particularly like, I have to say, and I'm not. I'm actually an Aboriginal New Zealander of Pākehā and Ngātahi descent. And I've always been very proud of both heritages. In fact, I've considered myself to be considerably advantaged by the fact that I am an Aboriginal New Zealander. I've never considered it personally to be a detriment. And I'm interested to hear concerns being expressed about who provides leadership and who gives permission for us to go ahead and pursue what we want to pursue in life. And I've never experienced that myself. I've always been guided by my historic roots, my culture, and I've always wanted to add to it. I've never felt I had to get anybody's permission to do anything at all. Now, whether I've been successful taking that particular bullheaded approach, I don't know. And I don't know what the mark of success is. I still consider myself a student of everything, and I go through life continually asking questions. But I felt my cultures, or my multiple cultures, actually encourage that. They're not a detriment to me. I'm wondering if you feel the same way, or you feel that there is some sort of impediment that you have to overcome. I hope you don't. That would be a very sorry state of affairs. But
Is that what you have heard up here? Is that the message that you're hearing from each one of us? Because that's not the message that we were.
I'm hearing
at least
some structural.
what I was trying to convey.
Yeah, I'm hearing something about structural impediments and who provides the leadership. It's foreign to my way of thinking about things, but it might be the Maori culture. I don't know.
I think if I could just comment on that, I think, I indicated earlier that I'd grown up in an environment where, as young people and as members of family, we essentially believed we could do anything we wanted. We had loving families, certainly not without our challenges. I wouldn't want to leave you with that impression. And, my parents basically, we weren't allowed not to do anything we wanted, and we weren't allowed not to do everything we were told. So my dad would take whoever was by the door and just sort of haul us out to do whatever he needed done at the time. So we learned a whole lot of different skills, not only technical skills, but how to sort of get along as a team and as a part of a community. So it was a very positive upbringing from that perspective. as I said, I wasn't really fully aware of the political scene until I had left high school and went to work in the city, and it was always sort of interesting to me. But I think that my intent would not be to indicate that being an Indigenous person is a detriment. It's something that I've certainly carried with pride my whole life. I have been aware, however, of some of the challenges that people who are Aboriginal in appearance face in stores, in restaurants, on buses, in the theater, wherever it is that people may go, because we do have to acknowledge that there are very strong negative stereotypes within our country today. And my two sons are very dark-haired and dark-skinned, and my daughter's fair. And I don't really know who experienced more negative experiences at school. My daughter, because people didn't think she was Aboriginal and she heard all of the things that people felt, or my sons, because they were the object of some of these sorts of attitudes. So I think that they've grown up pretty proud of who they are, with a real clear sense of the reality of what our society perceives and their own realities. They're all very successful. And, you know, as my son said the other day, there is absolutely no way that my nephews will grow up believing that they can't do whatever they want, because we have opportunities today that certainly we didn't have as parents. But no, I would not say that I've ever felt that being Aboriginal was a detriment. It's literally one of the shining stars of my whole life, to have that kind of identity. It was, I think it's just been a very important part of my life for my whole life.
Can
Could I just respond? It actually it's delightful to sit here and look at the pictures up there. I'm not challenging. I'm asking these questions because I don't know some of the thought processes that have led to what you've provided tonight. The pictures you showed up there are very, very familiar to me. If you put a few flax baskets in, that's a Maori community. It's exactly the same. And it's in New Zealand culture, you see scenes like that in a large number of places, and it's part of the culture. In New Zealand, Maori is a growing language. It's taught in all the schools. We have quite a different background experience. So I wasn't being disrespectful. I was, in the spirit of learning, I was just asking, whether or not that you have feelings that you haven't been encouraged to actually pursue as much as from our culture we have.
I didn't take it as a negative. I just... Yeah.
I did horribly. I would say something though. When I speak about creating space, and what I'm speaking about in terms of that leadership is that right now, unless more leaders are aware, regardless of their background, aware of the dynamics that happen between oppressed and privileged peoples, that we are likely to repeat those patterns. And so it's not that I look for somebody to say it's okay that I go ahead, although my personality, I tend to do that at times. That's a personal flaw maybe, I don't know. But it's not that I'm seeking permission to go forward. What I'm saying is that people in those positions throughout our society, and there's many, that there's need for them to understand these dynamics. And there's need for not just me as an Indigenous person to change, to grow, to succeed, but there's need on the other side of the equation as well for change, because they're in positions to influence me significantly. One of the difference between in New Zealand and Canada is the population numbers. With the numbers, the influence that the Indigenous peoples in New Zealand can have with their ratio of Indigenous peoples in the country is different than what we can do here. But I would suggest for us here in Manitoba that we're still kind of blind and we're still not standing up the way that we can, and space still isn't being created because our numbers are very significant. And if things don't change soon, I'm worried that it's going to get uglier.
Thank you. I think there's a contribution at the back.
Oh, I almost grabbed the mic too. So I just actually wanted to start off by saying how amazing I think it is that we're having this dialogue, and how forward-thinking that I think that the University of Manitoba is in the first place in Indigenous achievement. However, the reason why I'm actually saying something, which I don't usually, is because I heard from one of the students about the pharmacy and health, and I was just thinking how much more our students face than other students do. First of all, with a lack of affordable housing that's near the campus. So oftentimes, and this is the case, last night I stayed late with one of the students who was a father of 5 children on his own, an hour-and-a-half bus ride every day. And I just think that there's some things that we can do to be able to support those people. He was worried about his next semester. What am I going to do for childcare? I'm too far away from the kids' schools, and I don't have any access to housing over there. And I just look at the things that I'd like to see, some things that are able to help in those kind of realms, because it's not just about the education in the classroom, but it's also about some of the other challenges that students face. And so anyway, I just kind of like to know where that's going to go to.
So maybe I could respond to that. The panelists might have other comments as well. Certainly, we're, I think, very well aware of that reality and the need for affordable housing from the university's perspective, for Indigenous students, for international students, for graduate students. Many of our students come with families, with children. They need affordable places to live, and they need places to live where their families can be with them. And we need daycare for the children of these families while students are in class. And it's a different issue here on Bannatyne than it is on the Fort Garry campus. But on the Fort Garry campus, we're just in the early stages of a long-range planning process to address a lot of the housing needs and so on that we have. And I think that one of the strong motivations is precisely to address the needs of this community. So that will take some time, but it's very much a high priority for the university. I think there was another, yes, over here.
Good evening, I'm Thomas Beaudry. I'm very honored to be here and listening to our speakers as Indigenous people. My elders, when I've talked to them, we've always break things, unfortunately, in mainstream society to small little pieces. And I see our 4 panels, each in individuals in different areas. How do you see that success that you've developed in individual areas, to bringing it together as a whole, for us to be able to gather that knowledge and that success as we're taught by our circles or on our teaching circles? Like, these are awesome this way, but how do we bring it to our people so they see that and feel that it can be achieved? I went through some of those things too. Oh, you're not like the rest, you know. But I played a lot of sports, and I played hockey, and I've gone through it. I coached hockey, and I've heard the same thing, you know. Even right now, we have our kids that are not even playing hockey in the North End because the North Winnipeg Minor Hockey Association took it out of there. We got one community center playing because they were afraid to come to the North End. Why? You know, instead of us coming together, I see ourselves being successful individually and not celebrating that. You know, we have our little celebrations like Manitoba, but I mean, as a whole, how do we bring these little pieces back together? How do you see bringing it all together? And now maybe start or for the future?
Any observations, Deborah?
Well, yeah, I'd like to answer that. I mean, I see part of my role at the university providing some of the leadership around that, pulling those pieces together, We have the Pathways to Indigenous Achievement, which has those 4 directions. And a key of that is celebrating our successes as Indigenous people. This is one forum in which we're in right now, is a way to do that, to share some of our experiences, some of our knowledges. There's also ways that we could do work in the community, so we could bring our research, our skills, and have the community share it back with us. I mean, the possibilities are really quite endless, and it's really an exciting time to be at the university to help engage and guide and seek advice from a whole variety of partners to develop what you're talking about. It's about the community and sharing that knowledge and that expertise. So, and Michael's doing amazing work, and so is Heather spoke to it in her presentation.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Well, speaking from the experience when I was going through my doctoral studies, I was very interested in doing interdisciplinary research, pulling in stuff that I had learned when I was in peace and conflict studies, from education, from sport and community. And it's not easy doing it, especially in the university. The first one is that universities have to be open to interdisciplinary research. And I remember going to a conference for a NEAR conference, Network Environments for Aboriginal Health Research. And they were talking, the students from different provinces were talking about how their universities embraced interdisciplinary research. And I didn't find that that was happening just yet at the University of Manitoba. And that some of the ideas that I had in Faculty of Education about community sport and culturally relevant sport, they thought I should be in the Faculty of Kinesiology, and I really wanted to be in the Faculty of Education. So that's just speaking to that experience as a student. But my work, when I did my doctoral research with the Winnipeg Aboriginal Sport Achievement Centre and also with the Rec and Read Mentor Program, we are bringing in the strengths of youth, no matter where they're coming from. If they're coming from sports or art, or if they want to be involved in different things, we are always trying to find ways to bring it together. And it usually takes a lot more effort and time to do that. And also just speaking about some of the challenges that students have to participate, the Winnipeg Aboriginal Sport Achievement Centre, or WASAC, and Rec and Read, half the time what we're doing is we're going out there and we're helping them get social insurance numbers, helping them get birth certificates. We're going to them to the driver's bureau. We're taking them to get driver's license, taking them in our cars, teaching them how to drive. It's a process in a lot of work that the time never gets recognized, but the time has to happen. And those relationships really need to be there in order to bring out the strengths of youth, because as someone who has lacked self-confidence growing up all the time, I rarely looked at people in the eyes, and I've been trying to avoid actually even speaking because I'm always nervous. I find that actually that kind of lack of self-confidence, and I'm not trying to say it in a negative way, it just makes you sit back and listen to people. And I find that lots of youth actually like that about me. They like that I'm not first to stand up and tell them, this is what you should do, this is where I think you should go, that I'm willing to just kind of say, you know what, I didn't know what to do either then. And I sit back and I listen, and they sit back, and together it takes time, but we find our way. And I do appreciate all the questions, and I listen to all of them, and in my head and in my mind and my spirit, I'm wanting to answer. It takes me a lot longer. So if there's ever afterwards you want to chat, then I'm usually better at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, did you want to speak to this?
I find that a really interesting question, actually. Thank you for asking that. That's one of the discussions we've been having since Deborah came on at Fort Garry. It's how do you bring all of these little pieces together to form a larger whole. And a few years back, we'd gotten together with Faculty of Medicine, Social Work, Arts, Law. You know, there's one or two people, mostly one, in each of the faculties at the time. And what was really interesting at the time was that, you know, we all kind of looked at the challenges of being the only one and kind of the vision we had for where we'd like our faculties to go. But there was a sense of time isn't right, or we don't have the numbers, there's so much to do, we can't do it all. And so over the last few years, I've been really pleased with the momentum that certainly the Faculty of Medicine has gained, Faculty of Social Work. We're really privileged to be able to work together very closely, mostly because we kind of knew each other in undergrad, I guess, but the numbers are growing. And there's such synergy between all of the faculties. And I still live in the North End. All my friends think I'm nuts, but I kind of like it in that area. And I say it's like a small town, you know everybody. So you can build on that. But you know, unless you're playing hockey, you don't meet the other hockey parents. Unless you're playing soccer, you don't meet the other soccer parents. So unless you're involved in education, you're not going to get all those ideas mushrooming around you, and you can't be part of that. So I think there's little baby steps that we have, and we just keep building and take the responsibility to move that forward. Never say no to anybody that wants to join your group and continue to move these ideas forward, because I've been at the university really engaged for probably the last 7 years. Before that, I mostly worked up north and different places. But it's really moved along quickly. And I see the same kind of support and sport because of people like Heather and some of her other colleagues who've done really important research. It's an area that is growing, and people are listening. I do have to say, though, I was a little perturbed that the IKEA monkey got 20 times more airtime than the Idle No More movement that was going on the other day. So that's direct.
That's what I'm used to.
Hi, thank you all very much for having this conversation tonight. It's great. Michael, I wanted to pick up on your point about colonial policies at universities that impede our success for our Indigenous students, our Indigenous peoples. Can you give us a couple of examples of the policies that you see that might be creating that barrier?
I'll give you one in terms of the ethics committee. If I want to acknowledge an elder for the contribution and that elder's knowledge, I would be quite comfortable giving $500 for sitting down with them. Not because they asked, but because that's what I value. I can't do something like that because the interpretation is that I'm buying and influencing the research. I could go others, you want some others. About how elders can be included within the institution. There's no category in any collective agreement for elder. So as such then, in order for an elder to be properly recognized within the institution in a way that people of our communities recognize an elder, they end up being squished into some category or another. And usually the category is less than what we would believe is appropriate. So we would see an elder along the lines of a professor in terms of carrying that kind of knowledge and that level of knowledge. But we can't do that.
Ovid, were you? No, I think you had a hand up.
I want to thank you for being path makers for our people. And I have no doubt you're successful. Our people need to see that. And to get there, you all said the same thing. You didn't need anybody's permission to do what you had to do to succeed. There was obstacles in your way, but you dealt with them. And you overcame them. But you're also saying something very important, that there's still a lot of work to be done. That pathways to success is not just about individual achievement. it's also about transforming society, making it a better place for everybody, right? And colonialism is very much alive in this country. All you have to do is look at what Parliament is trying to do right now on legislation, where they're trying to impose the will of a conservative mind on a whole lot of people who have a freedom too, and a free will that is not being acknowledged by Parliament, and in particular by the government in power. I tried to transform society too, you know. I began at the University of Manitoba. I fought for things like Native Studies and a student lounge, basic things that students need, and student services for Aboriginal people. We did all that back in the 1970s. But I was given even a better opportunity to transform the country, never mind the university, through constitutional reform and something called the Charlottetown Accord, which would have compelled the governments to honor the treaties, but would have also acknowledged that Aboriginal people have a right of self-determination, that they have their own distinct form of government, and it would have been acknowledged as a third order of government within the constitutional framework. So I believe in constitutional change. I'm still in that mindset, right? Because I can see how the supreme law could change minds. And the reasoning was, as the reasoning should be in university, is that if the code of ethics or the basic precepts of the university acknowledge the fundamental role of Aboriginal people, that everybody will follow suit. It'll become part of the ethos of the place, right? It'll just be natural. No one has to fight for space. Space would be accommodated, you know, through the basic tenets of the university, as a space should be accommodated in the basic tenets of the Constitution of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For people who don't know, this is if anyone didn't recognize the back of his head, this is Ovid McRae, who is a graduate of the university, and as he said during his own time as a student, helped shape many things at the university and still is a good friend and advisor. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask James Blatz. We're coming to the end of the time. I suspect that there are people who would still like to talk, but I really feel quite strongly that when we've announced the time will be done, people may have other commitments and we should stop. People who want to continue to speak to the panelists are welcome to do so. I'm going to ask James Blatz if he'd make his summary observations.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Wow, what a powerful conversation defining the challenges and accomplishments in Aboriginal achievement through the many stories shared by this distinguished panel. Some of the key elements of the discussion have identified the need for space and representation and ideas at all levels in all organizations to begin to build a more comprehensive appreciation of the opportunities for Aboriginal achievement. Our panel members have openly shared stories of barriers and struggles that only they can truly understand, but we can all learn from. The greatest element, though, in this conversation this evening is a clear passion and enthusiasm of all of our panel members that they've displayed in committing their efforts towards the goal of inspiring Aboriginal achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And I want to thank all my colleagues, all the panelists. Thank you very much for being willing to do this. And to all of you, thank you for coming. The change of venue and the slightly cooler temperature than last month didn't keep you from coming. Really appreciate you being here. And I want to invite you to our next session, which will be on Wednesday, the 16th of January. Our topic will be the New West, the economic and political rise of Western Canada. We'll be returning to the Robert B. Schultz Theatre at St. John's College. And as was the case tonight, we'll meet for some snacks and reception at 6:30 with the conversation at 7 o'clock. So all of the details on this and other sessions in the series are on our website for Visionary Conversations. Let me say again, thank you very much for coming. Thanks to all the panelists, and hope that you have a happy and safe holiday season until we see you at the next session. Thank you.